first sentence, they missed out on the secrets by not being here. Okay, so the world's fisheries are drastically overharvested. There are too many fishing vessels catching too many fish at too great of a rate. The estimates vary, but it's clear that a lot of the world's fisheries are overharvested. There's the open ocean, where the fish don't belong to any country, and those fisheries are still in the process of being hammered. Even within the United States, 40% of the fisheries in the territorial waters of the United States are estimated to be overharvested. There are a huge number of species that are overharvested and in danger of drastic decline. When you get to below a certain level, there's less and less sustainability in a fishery because it's harder and harder for the fish to create the critical mass to recover their population size. In Europe, the problem is worse. For most of the things we go through in this class, in terms of controlling pollution and managing polluters, Europe is a little bit ahead of us. They have better regulations. They have easier to create the political capital to regulate pollution. In terms of fisheries, it's the other way around. In Europe, the fisheries have more political clout, and they've been overfished longer. They've had, in the United States, it's most of the story. In post-World War II, things got overfished so bad. In Europe, things were overfished beginning of the 20th century. And there's a lot of political power from the fisheries to keep regulators from really changing the way things are done. There's some estimates that most of the commercial fisheries will be overharvested by the middle of this century. So we're on a path. Things are overfished. We're running out of species. We move on to the next species. We have such capacity of fishing boats out there that we can just hammer through possible species. And this is a tragedy because the oceans are a huge resource. They are capable of producing a huge amount of food. And if we could, get our policy act together to manage them more successfully, these all could be done sustainably. So we'll start in this chapter with thinking about the biology. A lot of these, what we do is we start with a biological model, and then we layer an economic model onto that. And in the last step is we think about this dynamic model with interest rates and multiple periods. So we start with the biological model, and the two big things in the biological model are the size of the stock, which we can also call the amount of biomass, and the rate of growth of the stock. So we'll have a growth rate and a stock. In fish, this is the number of fish that are out there. And we don't always need to think about fisheries being like the whole ocean. A lot of fish have a little ecosystem, biome, region that they're from. So in this bay, along the coast of California, we will have the total number of abalone along the coast of Northern California, and we have the rate at which more abalone grow. We're trying to manage the abalone fishery. So this is the total population and the rate at which the population grows, and we can relate those together. So we're going to start with this basic biological model, and here's the growth rate up here. So this is the change in each, the amount that it's growing in each period. And here's the stock, the total number in the population. And the Schaefer model, been around for a while, is proposed to look like this. Okay? So if we go up on this side, we're increasing growth. We have more and more growth. If we go up on this side, we have more and more total biomass, or total number of fish. You have biomass because you have fish in a complicated model. You have fish getting bigger and the number of fish getting greater. So we have a couple of important points here where our growth rate is 0. These are two key starting points here. And we'll call this stock rate 1 and stock rate 2. There's two stock rates. Now this one is what we would call, this is at equilibrium where we're not growing or dying off. We would say that the population is steady here, and there's a formula you could say that the deaths plus outmigration, which would be losses, which would be decreases to our stock, are going to equal to births plus in-migration plus growth. So if we get to this natural equilibrium point here, there's really big stock at which deaths and births are balancing out. We could call this the carrying capacity. I can't read that. This is the carrying capacity of the underlying ecosystem. This is the biggest number of fish that would ever be out there. It's a natural equilibrium where the growth rate is 0 because it's so big that no more fish are growing or they're not growing at a bigger rate. We have another one here. And this, we can start now thinking about, let's divide this graph into 3 sections, okay? So we could have one section here and one section here. So this section in here, there's negative growth. This says if our population gets smaller and smaller and crosses below this threshold, we have negative growth. If we have less than this number of fish, the fishery dies off. The fishery goes towards 0 because now it's negative and the stock's getting less and less. At any point above this, the amount of fish is getting bigger and bigger. So this S1, we call this the minimum viable population. Below this, what you would say is the fishery crashes. It crashes to 0. And then there's two big areas here. In this area, we would say the growth rate is increasing. For all these levels of stock, from the minimum viable population size to this point here, that's the crest of our hill. And after the crest of the hill, the growth rate is decreasing. Which leaves us with one more important point, which is the top of the hill, right? This is the highest growth rate that we get. This is the highest on all of the different levels of growth we could have that we get to. And we're going to call this the maximum sustainable yield. So maximum sustainable yield is within all the ranges of how many fish we have in the fishery. This is where there's the most growth going on. This is where all the fish, there's a whole bunch of ecosystem out there for the fish to grow bigger and to recruit new fish that come in swimming from other areas and for it to have their, births grow to full size. So this is the greatest growth rate. If we're catching fish, this is where you would have the most fish replacing whatever you caught. So this is where the fishery is growing at the greatest rate. So we would have a growth point here that corresponds to the maximum sustainable yield. For any point along this line where we might be, it would correspond to some level of the stock if we were a fisheries manager. We could either go out and get data at where we are in the stock from the fish biologist, or we could try and shoot for a different point on that line if we were trying to manage it. So at each point, we would have a growth rate that corresponds to a stock. A little crowded. Um, so we have this maximum sustainable yield here, and we have these areas here where our growth is increasing rapidly. So places that we would want to be are places where the growth rate is high, somewhere near maximum sustainable yield. If we are on this area here, we're a little bit safer because if something happens to the fishery, if there's a weather event or something happens and our stock drops down, it's going to drop to the area where there's more growth. If we're managing the resource on this area and something happens out of our control, we're going to drop to lower and lower stocks where there might be lower growth rates. So this is sort of the area where the fishery is more healthy, and for the fish that we take out, more fish are going to grow in place, replenish the stock that we took away. Again, that concept of maximum sustainable yield, and where is our fishery? Somewhere between, we want to be between the carrying capacity, which is the biggest stock of all, and the stock that's going to give us the highest yield. So again, for any given stock size, there's a growth rate that corresponds to that. And if we're managing the fishery, we want to be able to match the rate at which we catch fish, at which we harvest from the resource. That's going to be matched by a level of growth that we're going to regrow the resource. We're going to regrow the number of fish that we caught out. Right? So we're going to allow this many fish to get caught, but we're going to know that we have a growth rate that corresponds, that's going to replenish it, so that we can be at some other equilibrium. So we'll start in the single time period, static. As we did this with the others, we started with static and then we moved to dynamic. But we'll start with a simple model. We'll say there's just a given price of fish. It doesn't depend on how much fish is landed. This is the big story in fisheries in the real world, is that if you come in with a lot of fish to the dock, the price of fish drops. So we will pretend in the simple model that there's just an exterior price of fish. Somebody at the fish factory or the fish wholesaler is just buying it at a fixed rate. It doesn't depend on how many fish are landed. And then the other big assumption we start with is that the marginal cost of effort is constant. It just costs a certain amount to send boats out there. And we're trying to sort of decide how many boats to send out there for how many days. We're going to start thinking that it's a constant cost. So to do this, we want to solve for how many fish get caught, right? And as I said, this is going to be related to that growth rate, right? We want to have an optimal amount of fish getting caught that are going to regrow and replenish. And then this effort level, the effort is a word we're going to use for the fishing. With constant cost, how many boats and are we going to put out there? This population level, right? How many fish are in the resource itself? So this is corresponding to the stock in our population model. We want to make sure we're on a safe place of the growth curve. And then we're maximizing net benefits, right? Revenue minus costs. We have some price per pound of fish landed, and we have a constant cost for sending the boats out there. We're going to set everything constant for now and solve in a single time period. So we're moving from the biological model. The biological model was growth versus stock. But if we want to solve an economic model, we need to have dollars in there. And what we're going to put it in terms of dollars, in terms of costs and benefits, net costs, revenue, and net benefits. And then we're going to put that in terms of effort. So we want to have revenue versus effort. Way to think about effort is a little tricky. It's usually thought of as some capacity times time, the number of boats that are sent out into the fishery for amount of time. So man years, vessel hours, like number of hours that you put a boat out to sea into it. So we assume that the boat's going to cost some amount of diesel, some amount of fishermen wages. So we have effort being a factor of a capacity and time. Vessel years, vessel hours. So our benefits, our revenues, are going to be the amount that we catch times a constant price. So our catch level is going to be amount that we catch times a constant price. And we have this constant cost that we proposed. Marginal cost and average cost are the same. It's constant for how many vessel years. As we put more units of vessel years out there, it's going to go up. When we did in the firm, we had a divergence between marginal cost and average cost, and that's where our profit angle came from. But here we don't have that marginal cost are equal to average cost. And we have some measure of net benefits. That's this benefits and revenue minus costs. And we're trying to maximize net benefits. So this economic graph has dollars up here in terms of how much we're going to get for the fish that we sell. And it also has cost, how much it's going to cost to send the boat out for so many hours. And this, because it has that same model underneath it, it's going to have the same curve of the population model buried underneath it. But now we have effort down here instead of stock. How hard we're going to fish, how many boat years we're going to allocate out there. So now this axis is reversed. Now we have less fish going in because we're catching more fish as we go out here. This is also more boats or boat years. Right? More boat years is going out on our effort scale. So so this is the amount of fish that we catch times the constant price. So this will be our revenue curve. Total revenue, the total benefits. And then we'll have a cost curve, and it's constant, so it's going to be a straight line as we go out. The more effort, it's going to be constant, straight line. Marginal cost and average cost are constant. Total costs. So we can start with different points here. We could go with maximum sustainable yield up at the top here. So if we were at maximum sustainable yield, there would be amount of revenue that we got, given the amount of effort that was down here. And this amount of effort would give us a certain amount of costs for that effort. So we would have a cost for that effort. We could actually put this MSY subscript if we're going to do things up at maximum sustainable yield. Right, so our benefits would be our revenue at the maximum yield minus the cost at maximum yield. So our question as managers or making a policy, how many boats should there be? How many days should they be out there fishing? Right, how many boats should be in the fishery and how many days should they be allowed to fish? There's other things we can do in the cost curve, how they're allowed to fish, what technology they're allowed to use that are going to affect this cost curve. We can also do things with policy that affect where this cost curve is. Let's say that if we want to look for the efficient point, the efficient point would be where there's the biggest difference between revenue and costs. And that point's going to happen where the slope of this is tangent over here to the slope of the total revenue. Then we would have the marginal cost equal to the marginal revenue. So there's got to be somewhere, so if we look at this slope, the slope of that's marginal cost. There's got to be some point where a line with that same slope would be tangent. And that's where this distance, let's call this the efficient level of effort. I'll just clean this up down here. So this is the level of effort, number of boats for maximum sustainable yield. And now we have the level of effort that's efficient. And here the revenue for the effort that's efficient minus the costs for the effort that's efficient would be maximized at this efficient point. This would be the point where we would maximize net benefits. Here we have marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, marginal revenue slope of the total revenue line, marginal cost slope of the cost curve, and then if we set that as our point, we would maximize the benefits. Up at maximum sustainable yield, we're maximizing the number of fish that are getting caught. But if we maximize the difference between these two lines, the distance between these two lines, then we're going to get the maximum amount of benefit, maximum amount of profit, we could also think about it as. Unfortunately, we have what most fisheries are run as is open access. And I'll talk about this on another slide, but while we're graphing this point, we have open access. More people can come in. We can't just set how many boats are there. If there's profit, if we're at this point, and there's a whole bunch of profit, as we've talked about in just the theory of the firm, when there's profit, capital seeks to go in there and get some of that profit. So more, if somebody else has a boat, they're like, wow, look, they're making out great in that fishery. I'm going to enter this fishery too. I'm going to stay out for another day. I'm going to come earlier. So they get more and more. And then in open access, the point is the profits get completely eliminated by people increasing the effort to where the average revenue equals the cost. So we would have a full level of effort, and we could say here open access. This level of effort is also no profits. Or another way to say it, it's getting really crowded, net benefits equals 0. So this would be people seeing how much profit is in here, either at the maximum sustainable yield or at the efficient point, and wanting to join the fishery, and profits would become less and less as we get closer and closer here until this is the point where profits are 0. There's a lot more boats out here at the profit equals 0 point, a lot more bigger boats out there longer, but the actual amount that any boat is making beyond just their costs goes down to 0. So, and I'll motivate this a few more times, but this efficient point corresponds to if it was a monopoly, if it was a single owner. If a single firm could manage the fishery, they could be at this point that maximize the revenue. If it's an open access and anybody can join the fishery, anybody can go out there, profits go to 0, and there's an awful lot more effort than the efficient effort going into it. There's a lot less fish. So again, this point where the slope of the lines are equal is the point that maximizes net benefits. This point that we end up with open access is where there are 0 net benefits. We did this with the slopes of the line, so the slope of the total revenue line is the marginal revenue line, the slope of the total cost line is the marginal cost. That's how we know where this point that maximizes net benefits is. One further twist is as this is kind of a big background story, as technology increases, it basically decreases the cost of fishing. So we can think about this as we've developed sonar. In World War II, they developed sonar to see other submarines, but now they can use sonar to find the fish. So instead of just driving around a bay fishing wherever you felt you were lucky, you can drive around so you see the fish on your sonar and get them. Bigger boats, more capital, bigger nets, spotter planes that fly overhead and find the fish. So there's a whole bunch of ways that technological progress can decrease the cost of catching fish. We can catch more fish at a cheaper cost per fish. Shifting this cost curve out is going to lead to a higher level at the efficient level of effort. These two are the efficient levels of effort. So decreasing the cost of fish is going to shift out the efficient level of effort. Or if we're at this open access point, which is where we are for a lot of fisheries, right? It's going to lead to a big increase out here in the number of boats that are out there. This is the point that has 0 net benefits, but now we have even more boats with more capital, with more technology to get out to this point. And remember, the hard part here is that this is more boats and more capital, and it's less fish, it's less stock. Right here, the stock is quite big. There's just an artisanal inshore fishery. There's like guys in canoes. Here, there's like huge diesel ships with giant dragger nets and spotter planes and sonar, and there's a lot less fish. And we're getting further and further as costs go down from the maximum sustainable yield point. So I'm not going to get too deep into math on the static versus dynamic, but remember, static is the one time period, and the dynamic is multiple time periods. And we've seen this in the other resource models we've done so far, as we make things more complicated by thinking about the cost we impose.